Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you all here. We are doing this as a live presentation right now. It's going to be recorded, and we're obviously going to post the recording later. So for all of you who aren't able to make it, obviously, I hope you're able to watch the recording. I am super excited to be here today with Chuck Meeker, who is the co-founder of Hyagen Medical. We did a podcast a couple of weeks ago where we kind of talked about the Hyagen way and sort of approach to marketing and compliance. And I thought it would be great today if I could do a presentation on more from a marketing standpoint with a sort of legal and compliance lens placed over it and using sort of Chuck's knowledge here. Chuck, great to have you back here. Thanks for joining me this evening and for nerding out with me a little bit on marketing and legal stuff.
Thanks, Andrew. Always a pleasure to be on a Tobe podcast or webinar.
Yeah, right on. So I'm just going to go ahead and get straight to the presentation. If anyone in the audience has any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. I'll be happy to pause and sort of talk and answer your questions. So first of all, the reason I put this presentation together today was because after talking, Chuck, we, obviously stem cells and stem cell therapy it's increasingly becoming a fixture in sort of the healthcare market. And, Peter Attia had a 60 Minutes interview a couple of weeks ago. It's all over the internet now. My friends were texting me and sending me, this is the best PR for him possible. And sure enough, even some providers actually reached out to me and said, hey, I heard you were working with a stem cell company and I saw some of your content out there about it. Are you even allowed to market it, right? And so the reason I thought this would be good that we both joined up, Chuck, because I think there's providers out there who might want to offer stem cells, but they're scared of marketing it, right? Because of the potential running afoul of FDA regulations and marketing regulations and things like that. I hear this a lot, and I think, Chuck, this is something that we had talked about, which is, people hear that they'll get banned from Google if they even use the words stem cell or stem cell therapy. Some people have had a bad experience trying to market peptides, and that's another thing that kind of has run into some issues with folks trying to run ads on Google for that type of stuff. And last but not least is if I can't run ads on Google, how am I actually going to get patients, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about some marketing flows and some marketing ideas that you can use if you're not going to be using paid search. So the first place I wanted to start, Chuck, was can providers actually get banned from Google if they advertise stem cells?
It's a great question.
I think it's really important to actually I get a little nerdy on you here, Chuck, from the marketing standpoint. But before I get into the specific language that you should use, and Chuck's going to help us with that, I do want to kind of clear up this myth in the industry. And so, like I said, I hear providers say all the time that I can't put stem cells on my website because I'll get banned from Google. And I just want to say that this is false. You will not get banned from Google, but you will get banned from their ad platform if you aren't careful. And you have to understand the difference between buying traffic and earning traffic. And so on the left side of the slide, we have paid ads, right? And that's where you effectively pay Google to skip the line, right? Because money is changing hands. Google is very strict here. If you try to bid on keywords like stem cell therapy or you make claims in an ad, their automated systems will flag you. And their systems are kind of smart, not completely intelligent as if it was a human looking at it, but they tend to err on the side of being conservative with these types of claims. So they'll reject the ad and they'll even potentially shut down your ad account, right? And this is what we call the red zone. On the right side, we have what's referred to as organic search. And this is what you hear as search engine optimization. And this is your website content, right? This is effectively your website content. Google's mission is to organize the world's information, right? And they want to index high quality educational content. They're not liable for your website content the same way they are for your paid ads, right? So for anything related to regenerative medicine, stem cell therapy, our strategy needs to shift away from buying customers with ads to earning them with compliant educational content that's going to rank organically, right? And that content needs to be high quality. And Chuck, the reason why I just found so much value in Hyagen Medical is because a lot of your value proposition is predicated on this idea of educating the provider on the right way to talk about stem cells and how they could potentially help with some of the, some of the things in people's lifestyles, right? So Chuck, before we even get into some of that, can you talk a little bit about like the Hyagen way and sort of why Hyagen decided to kind of take this approach to helping providers and with stem cells?
Sure. Yeah. So I love what you just said. At Hyagen Medical, we believe there is a right way to do everything in this industry. And so we built a company from the ground up on the platform of finding the right way and then implementing that. So, for example, there is a right way to procure or recover bioethical donated birth tissue at a hospital following a live, healthy birth in the United States. There's a right way to do that. It involves getting registered and certified, registered with the FDA to be able to procure or recover birth tissue after a live, healthy birth. There's a correct way to transfer that birth tissue into an FDA registered tissue processing lab to be able to process or derive the stem cells out of the birth tissue. For example, umbilical cord blood is full of stem cells, and there's a correct way to pull the stem cells out of the blood so that you don't have the blood components, you just have the purified stem cells. And the list goes on and on and on. There's a correct way to educate clinics. There's a correct way to educate patients. There's a correct way to market and advertise stem cells without running afoul of federal laws and regulations and state requirements as well. And we, without any pretenses, without any agenda at the start, we started at the foundation and said, what is the right way? And we built it up from there. I'm an attorney by trade. I practice in the Salt Lake City, Utah area. And because of that, I look at laws and regulations very strictly, and I read them and I understand them and I create a strategy for how to follow them. But my background is in the life sciences. I have a PhD in oncological sciences or cancer biology. Essentially, I studied molecular biology and biochemistry at the University of Utah School of Medicine. So I really nerd out over the intersection between law and regulation and science and medicine. So this was a great fit for us to look at the legal way of doing everything in this stem cell industry. What gets really interesting to me is when you look at how to advertise online. And I have no background in it. I have
Yeah.
no way of learning and knowing. So I rely on experts in the field and I vet experts to see who understands the Hyagen one right way of doing things and knows how to implement that in their search engine optimization and paid ad approach.
Yep.
And that's how you and I got connected, Andrew.
Yep. 100%. And thank you for that background, Chuck. I think as like stem cell therapy and sort of regenerative medicine in general starts to continue to come to the forefront, it's only getting more popular. I see that in the search demand. I see that in Google Trends and whatnot. I think it becomes even more important. And I think of this as sort of like, I call it like the GLP-1 disaster, right? Of all this, there was such a messy situation that sort of happened. And, the pandemic and all that stuff, and supply chains and all that had a lot to do with it as well. But I think the way that you're doing this is making sure that we don't run into issues like that again in the future, right? And especially with such a powerful, modality like this, right? That is now just becoming, we'll talk about people having going to Mexico and all these places to get stem cell therapy done, but it's here in the U.S., right?
And
And
it's legal.
it's legal, right? And you just got to make sure you source it from the right way, right? But also talk about it in the right way, and we'll get into that when we get into marketing. I did want to double click really quick more on this, why we can't run paid search ads for stem cells. And it really comes down to three things, right? So first off is user safety. Google treats healthcare as it's called like your money or your life content, right? And a few years ago, there were just way too many bad actors, and not just in the healthcare industry, right? Across multiple industries, financial, real estate, all these places. A few years ago, there were too many bad actors that were making wild, kind of predatory claims, and in the case of healthcare, curing impossible diseases, right? You might have even seen this in the supplements world and all that kind of stuff, which is why it's almost impossible right now to advertise supplements without having what's called a legit script certification that allows you to basically advertise those sorts of things. So Google had to step in to protect its users from these sort of scams, right? Because with Google, it's the number one search engine. It's the easiest way to get in front of people, and you can literally pay to get your scam in front of people. So Google's job is it has to protect its customers, right? So second is they actually have a very specific policy against what they call speculative and experimental medical treatments. Since most regenerative therapies we talk about don't have that full FDA approval for these specific use cases, and we know, Chuck, in your case, the way that you source your stem cells and do it is FDA approved, as opposed to some other places that may
I'll
not
say
necessarily.
I'll say FDA compliant. But
FDA
yes.
compliant. Okay, that's the right way to say it. We'll make sure we get that in the edit as well. But since most regenerative therapies we talk about don't have that full FDA approval for these specific uses, Google is just going to blanket categorize them as speculative, right? They're going to be very conservative with the way they think about these things. And thus they have a bot for everything. Their sort of policy bot automatically is going to block this kind of content. Right. And last but not least, and this has always been true for the advertising world, is about endorsement, right? When Google takes your money for an ad, it's being viewed as a paid promotion or an endorsement. Now, Google is a multi-billion-dollar brand. They don't want to take any risk whatsoever of the liability of endorsing a treatment that isn't federally approved, right? I'll give you another example in another industry. So we used to do a lot of advertising for continuing education companies that worked with real estate agents. And the idea was that real estate agents, they've got to get their education done, every year, depending on the state, to keep up with their hours for continuing education. I worked for a company and did marketing for a company that was selling courses to real estate agents. We could not really advertise using the full suite of Facebook and Google tools because it thought that we were advertising in the housing category because it was real estate. Even though we were only doing B2B advertising, it thought that we were doing B2C advertising. And so some of the claims and statements that it made, their bot went off, and it basically said like, oh, you're making weird claims about housing that fit into categories related to housing discrimination and things like that. So even though we had nothing to do with trying to sell homes, right? The Meta and the Google bots automatically flagged us, right? And it's a very similar sort of situation when it comes to these sort of these what they call speculative and experimental medical treatments. But if you do notice at the bottom of this slide, Google does allow ads for educational content, like medical conferences or academic papers. So like I'm going to the A4M conference in December. It's the Anti-Aging Academy. They do a lot of certifications for stem cell therapy and things like that. A lot of regenerative medicine practices and owners go to this conference. I'm seeing ads for their conference all over the place, right? And they're talking about information session that they're having on stem cell therapy and things like that. I've seen those in ads all over the place. And again, things for like conferences or academic papers, that's totally welcome. But the key, though, is that education is kind of the loophole, if you would, for being able to get found on Google. Maybe not necessarily through ads, right? Because regardless if you put up compliant information in the ads, they're most likely going to flag it. But if you put good educational compliant information on the organic side, it gives you a much better chance to win and sort of find that customer.
So, Andrew,
Yeah.
let me ask you then, and this is putting the cart before the horse because we haven't gone through all of the ins
Yeah,
and outs.
sure.
But what if a healthcare provider, an owner of a clinic, creates an ad and wants to pay to have that ad run at Google, and the ad says, "Come to our free educational seminar to learn about uh, federally compliant stem cell therapy in the U.S."
Yep. As long as you're not making any claims about what stem cells do in there, it's literally just you're talking, it's an information session, right?
Yeah.
So first off, you are able to advertise that event. It's an event, right? And
Yes.
the content of the event, like that's all up to you on how you want to provide it. What would get flagged is advertising an in clinic promotion or special that is selling stem cells, saying we're having our Black Friday special on stem cells, right? And if you actually said something in there that said, hey, it does this, this, and this, and this, that'll get flagged. But the pure act of just saying that you're selling stem cells or offering a promotion on stem cells on Google or Meta is immediately going to get you flagged.
Wow. Okay. So what about an educational consultation, an in-person consultation to discuss the pros and cons of stem cell therapy and whether it's right for you?
I
Is
would,
that
I think that has commercial intent to it.
yeah?
Yeah,
Hey,
right.
good. Oh, this
So
is I never knew that. That's great.
yeah, it has commercial intent. It could be a free consultation, sure, but it's almost considered like a lead, right? So if you're like doing marketing trying to generate a lead in that sense,
Yeah.
then I would probably err on the side of not running that as an ad. I would probably email
Very
it out
interesting.
to your list. I'd probably, put an organic post up about it, even getting a creator or an influencer to post about it maybe, but organically, right? But running an ad for a consultation related to stem cells is most likely going to get you flagged. Now, there's certainly been instances like I'm using peptides as an example for this, but half the time we'll get flagged for running a peptides related ad, half the time we won't. But we have certainly run peptide ads where we've had informational sessions where people would sign up to just learn more about what it is, how it works, and that kind of stuff. We've run those, haven't had any issues with that on the peptide
Very
side.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anything that has like if it's seen as a like the word consultation, when you put it in there, that's like a buzz, that's like an immediate word that the algorithm is going to flag, and it's probably going to dive down a little bit deeper. That algorithm is a black box. I don't know exactly obviously what goes into it, but anything that seems to have like very, very clear sort of commercial intent is going to get flagged. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
All right. It's a great question, Chuck. All right. So what I wanted to show you was I live here in Utah, and what I wanted to do is show you examples of real life searches. And remember, when you are searching on Google, everything is what's called geolocated, right? So it knows your location and it's going to show you different search results based on your location. Now, when I type in medical weight loss, Botox, peptide therapy, and stem cell therapy, and I put Utah at the end of it, or when I put near me at the end of it, it automatically signals to Google to show you what I call like the yellow pages version of Google. It's going to show you more local search results. If I did not put Utah in front of that, most likely you would get like the Mayo Clinic, or you might get like national brands that are showing up that may not be as relevant to local search. The reason I did this was because medical weight loss and Botox are not speculative, right, treatments as defined by the FDA, right? And as you can see there, you see that little sponsored tag that goes onto the ad right there. That is showing you that is a purchased placement on Google. And so as you can see here, the first two placements are above what we call the organic search results, which show up what we call below the fold here, right? So as you can see for medical weight loss and for Botox, there's clearly sponsored results there. But when you type in peptide therapy and stem cell therapy, there are no sponsored results there. And that should be a very clear signal to you that anyone that is showing up in Google search, right, for peptide therapy or stem cell therapy, they're most likely doing a lot to engage in search engine optimization or that organic side of the equation that I talked about earlier in the presentation, right? So this is a very important example because it shows that if you do want to, it is possible to get found in search with Google, but it is very unlikely that you're going to be able to run an ad that's going to focus on something like stem cell therapy. Does that make sense, Chuck?
Indeed.
Right on. Cool. All right. So, Chuck, I was wondering if you could maybe jump in here and let's sort of reiterate the science, right? And I think if you are a provider that signed up for Hyagen, you've probably heard a lot of this stuff before. But if you're not a provider and you're maybe interested in working with Hyagen, Chuck, one great thing that you do in the presentation and training that you do is you use this like start saying this, but stop saying this, right? When you're talking about stem cells. Could you maybe give us a little bit of a primer on sort of the science behind stem cell
Sure.
therapy and sort of the Hyagen way, kind of reiterating what you had talked about a little bit earlier on in the presentation?
Yeah, I'll keep this brief, but just to
Yeah.
connect it with what we've been talking about, this is when you start running organic posts or organic content on your website, there are things that you still can't say or shouldn't be saying because it creates some regulatory risk. And we want to try and take the target off of your back from a legal and regulatory standpoint. So this slide has nothing to do with getting your Google Ads account banned. It has
Correct.
everything to do with some federal or state regulator reviewing your website, reviewing your content and saying, you're not compliant with the regulations because you are making claims about what stem cell therapy will do for your patients. So, in the stop saying category, we have three main things. Number one, we want to stop saying that stem cells will do anything. I know it's like this wacko's on here telling us we can't say stem cells are effective. I'm not saying stem cells aren't effective. I'm saying we need to stop talking about stem cells as doing something. That's because stem cells that are taken from birth tissues like the umbilical cord and the placenta, their function biologically is not to be a seed that gets planted and grows into new tissue. That's a misnomer. It's inaccurate information. Biologically, the umbilical cord blood stem cells that circulate through the umbilical cord and into the growing fetus, they don't get planted in the baby's tissues and start growing. That's not what they do biologically. It turns out that's not what they do therapeutically either, unless you manipulate the cell and cause it to do something other than what it does naturally. By the same token, umbilical cord stem cells are not little construction workers that come in and repair areas of damage. That's not what they do in the womb, and that's not what they do therapeutically. Instead, birth tissue derived stem cells are nature's carrier vehicles. They're nature's delivery trucks. They're full of natural biological human growth factors and cytokine proteins that the body recognizes as signaling molecules. So we say stop talking about stem cells as if they're doing something, as if they're regrowing tissue, as if they're healing or repairing, or as if they offer a cure for something. The stem cell does not do that. The stem cell is a courier that delivers natural biomolecules. And your body is programmed to receive the signal of those natural biomolecules and to respond to the signal. So we talk about a delivery truck analogy, a stem cell being a delivery truck with cargo inside. And the cargo is the growth factors and cytokines. Now, our bodies already have growth factors and cytokines in them. When those growth factors, for example, bind to a cell receptor, which is like a signaling informational docking station on the cell, that signaling message gets transferred inside the cell and the cell responds and behaves in a different way. And it's the cell's behavior that gives the output that you're looking for. Anyone that ever talks about stem cells or stem cell therapy reducing inflammation or leading to healing and repair, it wasn't the stem cell that did that. It was their body's own cells that did that. The stem cell delivered the signaling molecules that activated the molecular and cellular pathways that caused the patient's own body to ramp up its healing activity and lead to the beneficial results. Okay? So when
Yep.
we talk about what stem cells are going to be effective at doing, stick to the delivery truck analogy because stem cells will always do that. They will always effectively deliver natural biological human growth factors and cytokines. Full stop. Now, your body is already pre-programmed to receive the signal from those growth factors and cytokines and to respond in beneficial ways. It's all over the published medical literature, how these growth factors that are also found in stem cells are used in the body to activate molecular and cellular growth and regeneration pathways.
Right on. Thank you so much for that, Chuck. And actually, one thing I just wanted to maybe circle back to in the presentation, I wanted to go back to this slide here. So the important thing to note, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to explain to everybody sort of what content you need on your website from an organic standpoint to really stand out in search. But the important thing to note is that the language that Chuck is going to help us identify as we're trying to craft like good marketing for stem cell therapy is that even if you use the compliant language that Chuck's going to share with you today, if you put it on paid ads, it's very likely still that you're going to get banned or you're going to get your ads rejected from Google, even if you're using some of the compliant language you're using, just because, like I said before, Google is going to err on the side of being conservative when it comes to these sites, advertising these sorts of treatments and therapies. On the other hand, if you use the compliant language that Chuck is talking about for organic search, right, this will make sure that if you do get audited or you do get found by the FDA, that as long as you are using that compliant language for organic search, right, that you are still in compliance with marketing, right? So it's really important to note here that if you decide to do organic content, it's still very important that you use the compliant language that we're going to talk about here today. So, because even if you use quote unquote non-compliant language, you can get found in organic search, but you could still potentially trip up regulations around the FDA about being compliant with some of the statements that you're making. So I just wanted to note that that's like a very important sort of aside to note here when you're thinking about content, because you can put whatever content you want on your website for Google, and Google will index it, even if it's non-compliant, but that doesn't necessarily going to keep you safe from the FDA if you were to run into an audit or anything along those lines. So I just wanted to maybe note that distinction here. And if you have any other
Yeah,
comments there, Chuck, please, I'd love to hear your thoughts as
yeah,
well.
this would be a good time to remind our listeners. Most of the stem cell therapies and stem cell products on the market today are not FDA approved drugs. There are a couple of FDA approved stem cell products. For example, Omesergy, which you can look up online and you can find it on Google. Omesergy is an FDA approved umbilical cord blood derived stem cell product used for blood cancer patients following chemotherapy to help them regenerate their blood population so they can get to their next round of chemotherapy. It accelerates their healing, right? It's an FDA approved drug. Google doesn't care that there are FDA approved stem cell drugs because they still put stem cells in the category of experimental procedures.
Yes.
The stem cell products that we're talking about are not FDA approved drugs. They don't go in that pathway for approval. They go in a different category called human cellular and tissue based products. They're HCTPs. And there is a compliance pathway at the federal level, at the FDA, that allows you to introduce these products into interstate commerce without needing pre market approval like these drugs have and still be compliant federally, as long as you're doing everything the right way. So we started this conversation saying at Hyagen Medical, we built our company on the foundation of doing everything the right way from the beginning. That's because the only thing we cared about was how do we fall within this FDA compliance category for human cellular and tissue-based products so that we don't need an FDA approval in order to administer stem cell therapies legally.
Yep. And this is where the whole concept of homologous use, right? And
Yes,
where they're
minimum
sourced
liberation.
from,
That's
and the
exactly
fact
right.
that you built your supply chain, that, you source it from, umbilical cord blood and all that kind of stuff that we talked about in the previous podcast. That's what allows you as a company to feel comfortable selling this product in the United States, right? And
That's right.
why people should go to a company like Hyagen, right, to source their stem cells rather than going down to Mexico where you have no idea where that vial came from. There's no way to trace the supply chain like with you guys, right? Okay. Well, let's get to the marketing piece of this. So, for all the providers out there, one thing that we do a lot of work is we build a lot of websites, right? And the number one page that is a signal to Google that you offer a service and that you're an expert in is what's called a service page, right? Every business needs to have a service page, especially a local small business, whether you're a single practice clinic or you're a multi-location clinic, right? You need to have a service page which talks about what that service is and what it does. And so what Google does is that they've built a sort of a page structure that is friendly for Google to index or put into a table of contents, if you would. Just imagine the millions, billions of pages of web content that's out there. If they all had their own schema and architecture, there'd be no way that Google could index all that content, right? And so what Google did was said, hey, look, we're the number one search engine in the world. If you want to get found on search, you need to follow this specific schema or this structure, right? It's sort of like a roadmap that every website needs to follow. Coincidentally, the content that Google wants on these pages is also what high intent searchers and buyers need to make a decision, right? So it kind of married up like the nerdy technology part of it, which is indexing the content and the zeros and ones, with what are people actually looking for on the internet and what drives a high intent searcher. I will say for all the providers out there, if you're thinking about search versus social, in general, search is going to get you what we call a higher intent buyer. Just think about the activity that you have on search versus social. On social, you're scrolling through your Instagram feed, your Facebook, baby pictures, family reunion pictures, things like that. Oh, something about stem cell therapy. This looks interesting, right? And it could be an organic post. You'll tap on that, you'll read about it, but you weren't looking for something related to stem cell therapy, right? Now, contrast it to Google. You go to the Google search bar and type in stem cell therapy. Most likely, someone typing in stem cell therapy is looking for informational content or commercial content right there on the spot. That's a very different buyer journey than someone who was scrolling through Facebook or an Instagram and randomly saw a post or an ad, right? So what we're talking about here is content that will go on Google from an organic standpoint that will not only help you get found by Google, like those folks that we saw in search when we did Stem Cell Therapy Utah, but also when those people land on your page, that you're going to have good information there that will help them take the next step, which is to pick up the phone and call you or to book their first sort of consultation with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through sort of the different sections of a page. And with certain sections, I'm going to actually ask Chuck to jump in and sort of provide the kind of Hyagen approach to describing the specific parts of sort of a Google-friendly web page. So the first one is the hero, or what we call the H1 headline. And typically, this is just your target keyword. And for all the providers out there who are working with a web developer or building your websites on your own, it is so important to have the geography inside your H1 because that signals to Google that you are a local service provider. So if I put stem cell therapy in Lehi, Utah, stem cell therapy in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the very top, what we call the H1, and there's a way to assign that very top text as an H1, make sure you put stem cell therapy in your specific city or location that you're trying to get found on. This is one of the biggest signals to Google that you're a local service provider. Second, the other piece of information that Google is looking for is what is it, right? And so in this case, usually in the second section of your website or that service page, you're going to put what is stem cell therapy, or you're going to describe what stem cell therapy is. And Chuck, if you could jump in here and sort of give what you would sort of say is the compliant or the right way to say what is stem cell therapy. And I know you provided kind of a long way to say it in a short way of saying it. That'd be great.
Sure. So many times you'll want a very brief and concise explanation that people can digest without having to read a paragraph. In that case, a short descriptor might be very helpful to you. Something like stem cell therapy involves administering FDA compliant umbilical cord stem cells therapeutically, right?
Yep.
That's information there. And what you've done is you've let people know, okay, this is not plant or fish stem cells.
Yes.
And this is not stem cells taken from my own body and re-administered to me.
Yep.
Both of which, by the way, are different industries. And you can find those industries if you go out and look for them. But you want to explain what you do in your clinic. And in your clinic, if you're using FDA compliant umbilical cord stem cells therapeutically, put that in your what is descriptor.
Yep.
You can also give a more long-winded description. I'm often long-winded when I give presentations, and I would say things like, well, stem cell therapy involves administering FDA-compliant, bioethically sourced, CGMC purified stem cells as therapeutics, typically by injection, infusion, or topical application. So there's some more information in there so people go, oh, great, I was looking for an IV infusion. They have it here. And it lets them know what kinds of therapies you're doing
Yep.
or what kinds of administration modalities you're using, not just what kind of products you're using.
Yeah. And so an example might be like maybe you use the long version in like a caption for an organic social media post, right? You might use the long one in an FAQ, right? That you might put on your website, and you might use the short one in like an overlay on an image that might go on your website that describes what stem cells are, right? I love the short one because I'm a marketing guy. A short is always good for marketing, right? But as you can see here, there is a lot of nuance, right, in the way that Chuck has written some of the stuff here. So for me, the nuance on the short one was the compliant umbilical cord stem cells, right? That is like a big qualifier there that I think can keep you safe. And again, if you're working with Hyagen, that's how they source their stem cells, right? So the company that you're sourcing stem cells is also important because you can't make these claims if they're not a company doing it that way, right? So
If they're really not FDA compliant stem cells, if you market them as FDA compliant stem cells, well, now you've falsely advertised
Yep.
them. So it's critical that you vet, even interrogate your stem cell provider to make sure that you're getting what you need to get in
Yep.
order to advertise the way you want to
What
advertise.
what are two questions that you would ask your stems if you have a stem cell provider or if you're buying stem cells from a company? What should you as a provider ask?
Yeah, so I would ask three main questions. Number one, are you a lab or do you source from a lab that is registered with the FDA to process birth tissue? human biologic tissue. There's lots of labs that are FDA registered to bank cord blood, for example, but they don't have the right registration for processing and packaging and labeling and storing and distributing products. So ask to see their FDA registration first and foremost. Second, ask them if they have a medical director that reviews the donor mother's medical history each and every time birth tissue is donated so that you can know for certainty that they're not just accepting birth tissue from no matter where it comes from. Um, on that same note, you could ask them where they source their birth tissue from. Is it a local source of birth tissue, or do they get it from out of the state or out of the country? These are all important considerations because the longer it takes for the birth tissue to arrive at the processing lab, the more that the cells die and burst open. We've heard horror stories about people paying thousands of dollars to receive stem cell products only to have it tested and find out there are no cells inside.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so asking to see not just the registration, but also to understand where sourcing takes place and ask them for verification of that. Can you show me where your birth tissue recovery company is contracted to recover birth tissue? The third thing I would ask them is, do you send your product off for independent third party testing before distributing it to clinics? There's lots of bias that happens in the lab that processes the tissue, and they don't want a batch to go to waste. But the safety and efficacy of the product depends on having checks and balances. So those are three questions that I would ask every single person that walks in your door to try and sell you a stem cell product.
Right on. No, that's super helpful, Chuck. Thank you for that. Well, the next thing that Google is looking for in a good piece of organic content, and frankly, any searcher on the internet that may seriously consider you as a provider is how does it work, right? So in this specific instance, how does stem cell therapy work, and or what can stem cell therapy help with?
Yeah. So this answer should already seem familiar to everyone viewing this because we've talked about it already. The
Uh-huh.
short answer is stem cells are full of growth factors, which are proteins that activate regenerative healing pathways in the body. That's how they work. That's how they do what they do. And that's how they can help by delivering these growth factors. Okay. A longer version of that, a more detailed explanation might be stem cells carry and deliver a variety of natural, biological, human growth factors and cytokines. The same growth factors and cytokines that your body uses to activate regenerative healing pathways at a cellular level. So you can see we can get into more detail, we can be more helpful, or we can be short and concise and get people wanting to ask more questions. But
Yep.
that's really how stem cells work, and that's what you should be saying. Don't fall into the trap of saying stem cells heal your torn ligament. Don't fall in the trap of saying stem cells treat your disease or medical condition. That's not what stem cells do. That's not how they work.
Yeah, and this key is activate regenerative healing pathways in the body, right? These are regenerative healing pathways that already exist, right, in your body, right? And they kind of act more as a catalyst than anything else, right?
Yeah, now it's a good point, Andrew. And notice that we don't say stem cells activate regenerative healing pathways in the body. That's not accurate. A
Uh-huh.
stem cell doesn't come and activate a pathway. A stem cell is a what? It's a delivery truck.
It's only a
That,
truck.
that's what the stem cell does. It delivers the growth factors. Now, these growth factors happen to be the same human growth factors that bind and activate the regenerative healing pathways. And so we hope what's going to happen is what's already happening in the body
In your
at a
body. Yep.
higher level, right?
Yep. 100%. Cool. Again, nuance is so important in saying in this, and that's why I'm just trying to point out some of the nuance so that all our listeners can understand it. So
What else you
next
got?
next question: who does it
Oh, this
help?
one's tough. Yeah. How does it help? So this is someone specifically asking,
Yep.
what can stem cell therapy fix in my body?
Yep.
Don't fall into the trap. You don't have to say that stem cells are going to overcome a challenge, that stem cells are going to fix an issue. You can be accurate and you can still be compliant. In short form, you could say the human body can heal its own injuries by activating repair pathways with the right growth factors. Stem cells are full of the same natural biological human growth factors that your body already uses to activate regenerative healing pathways. Do you see what we did? We did not tie the stem cells and their growth factors and cytokines to the activated pathway or the healing. We put a stop in between. The pathways exist and the body uses growth factors, and stem cells contain those same growth factors, which is why we administer them therapeutically. You don't have to make a claim, and you shouldn't make a claim about what functional attributes or what structural changes will take place in the body following stem cell therapy. A longer way of saying this is
Yep.
the human body is already pre-programmed at a cellular level to respond to growth factor and cytokine signaling by activating molecular pathways involved in controlling and reducing inflammation, clearing cellular debris and scar tissue, forming and supporting healthy vasculature, and enhancing cellular growth and repair of damaged tissues. Most people simply need to activate those pathways with the right growth factors and cytokines. Stop, move to the stem cells. Stem cells are full of the same natural biological human growth factors and cytokines that your body already uses to activate regenerative healing pathways. Okay? I don't know what else you would expect from an attorney than to walk the line of fine tuned language in order to stay compliant. This is how we do things at Hyagen.
Yep.
We consult with you. We help you find satisfying, informative language that still remains compliant so that you don't have to worry about an FDA agent coming in and saying, you're making a claim about what your stem cell therapy will do for your patients.
Yeah, and from a marketing perspective, right? Like there's almost a beauty in art and crafting this language, right? Because it has to I think you toe the right line between this idea of compliance, but also simple, plain marketing speak, right? Because look, as a provider, you do want to address things around inflammation, clearing cellular debris, scar tissue, those sorts of things, but you want to be so careful to say it in the right way, right? And so,
Well, and if you don't address those topics, then people think you don't know anything about stem
that's
cells.
right.
They're like,
Yeah.
oh, they're just waving their hand. They don't really understand. So you have to give them a satisfying answer.
Yeah.
You have to do it in a way that doesn't put you at risk for
Right.
a warning
So
letter from the FDA.
if someone comes to you, Chuck, and say, just pretend you're a provider, and they say, "Hey, I heard stem cells can help with autism," right? You have to kind of think a little bit about how to respond to that within this framework, right?
Yeah, so the way I would respond is that's interesting that someone would say stem cells help with autism. What is autism? Autism is a label that we put on a medical condition that is related to inflammation and cellular debris in the brain and neurological region that precludes proper blood flow and has damaged cells in the area. So stem cell therapy is really interesting because it contains the natural biological human growth factors and cytokines that the body uses to clear away inflammation and cellular debris and to reduce swelling and inflammation and to form and support new vasculature and to help repair and regrow damaged tissues. So administering stem cell therapy to an autism patient is an interesting approach because they're full of the growth factors and cytokines that our body already uses to address the causes of autism.
Awesome.
Did I say that stem cells are going to treat autism?
Nope.
No. Did I say that the stem cells are going to reduce inflammation
Nope.
and clear cellular debris, and improve the symptoms of autism. No, you never have to say any of those things. You just have to use sound science
Yep.
and talk about this with a divide between what happens in the body and what the stem cells carry.
Yeah, they're a carrier vehicle for things that are already in your body that already fix these things,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
Right?
So that if your body already has them, why are you using them?
Yep.
Well, it's because the umbilical cord blood stem cells have those biomolecules in ultra high concentrations in an amazing entourage, a portfolio stacked full of them, dozens and dozens and dozens of these. As our bodies age, the amount and the quality of those growth factors goes down over time. So we're
Yep.
going back to the original source of those same growth factors and cytokines that our body is already programmed to work with.
I bet you there's a bunch of providers out there who would pay good money to have you by their side at all times when them or their clinicians are making some of these statements. But I'm assuming you're maybe too expensive for that, Chuck.
The interesting thing is, we don't charge for this stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
We're a stem cell provider and clinical empowerment and education
Right
company.
on. Yeah.
And those providers that work with us to get their FDA compliant stem cells and get the other services mostly free of charge. We come in and do on-site training and educational events,
Yep.
implementation training to help them know how to do all these things. And they don't have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to get set up to do stem cells the
Yeah.
right way.
I think that's brilliant. I think that certainly differentiates Hyagen. And I think, like I said in the beginning, there's a very clear value proposition there for providers. All right. Is it legal? I mean, we
Oh,
know.
this is a great one. It's always important to let people know that you're not flying under the radar with an illegal product. So sometimes the best thing to do is to just say, guess what? Stem cell therapy is legal in the US, but you need to visit a compliant provider that sources stem cells from an FDA registered lab, right? So tell the truth. Stem cells can be legal if you're doing things the right way. A longer way to say that is, even though most stem cell products are not FDA approved drugs, they can be compliant with all federal and state laws and regulations, making them legal in the US and here in your state. But you must use a compliant provider that sources stem cells from an FDA registered lab. Of course, there are more requirements than that, but letting them know the key feature, you've got to do this compliantly. You've got to choose the right provider who has already chosen the right source for those stem cells. Really, really helps you to get people's trust and interest.
Yeah, this is an outstanding FAQ question and one that I think is frequently searched. In fact, I have a keyword research tool that we have to do for search engine optimization, right? And before I prepped for this presentation, I was just looking for search demand around the question, are stem cells legal in the US? There's tens of thousands of searches a month for that right now.
Yep.
So just imagine if you're able to create content around that and you localize it to your state, like Google can connect you with someone
Powerful.
through search, right? And there's this thing that when you look at search terms, it's called search difficulty or SD. What search difficulty is, how much competition is there for that particular term? There's no competition out there right now for that term. It is a wide open space. So if
Nobody wants to talk about it because nobody knows how to do stem cells legally and compliantly unless you happen to have an attorney and a PhD biochemist at your company.
I mean, Chuck, even the podcast that we did a couple weeks ago, when I posted the transcript, our website's set up good, so it gets indexed by Google very quickly, but already I was starting to get people's like consumers searching for stem cell stuff and finding our like blog talking about providers. So I think there is a open space out there right now for a marketing savvy provider to really try to create some content here to get connected with consumers looking for it, because they're certainly looking for it right now. And because there's no ads out there, no one is able to buy their way to the top. So I see this as a really interesting arbitrage opportunity, actually, from a marketing standpoint. You don't see these opportunities that often with highly trending topics, right? So obviously, a couple of years from now or whenever, as this gets a lot more into the ether, you're going to see there's going to be a lot more competition there. Google may even allow it as an advertising category, for example, right? But I do think right now there's an amazing arbitrage opportunity if you really want to create a lot of good content on stem cell therapy and to put it out there in a compliant sort of way. Yeah.
If you need some help doing this the right way, make sure you reach out to Andrew. He can work with us. We can work
Yep.
with you. You can always find us at hyagenmedical.com. But Andrew has been such a great source for implementing the Hyagen way at specific clinics.
Yep.
We've been really impressed.
Okay. Well, I have a couple more technical things to just talk to our audience about from a Google standpoint. So, a couple of things if you have a website out there, and this is just to make sure that you give yourself the best absolute chance to get found by Google through Google search once you start creating this content with the language that Chuck has been sharing with us. So, the first is, and I see this missed a lot, this is probably one of the biggest misses I see on provider websites, is there's a code that goes on basically the back end of your website that explicitly tells Google that you're a local medical clinic, your address, your hours, and your phone number. This allows you to get easily indexed in near me searches. And if you talk to your web developer, you want to ask them if they've implemented local schema markup on your website. And if they haven't, it's usually pretty easy to create that schema. It's not like a huge project. It's literally a snippet of code that you put into your website. But that is something that I see is a huge miss. That is one of the lowest hanging fruit that a lot of providers miss and why they don't get indexed in Google. The second is, as we all know, ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude are all search engines effectively now. And what we found actually in looking at the data is there is a much higher propensity for an audience to be searching for things related to longevity medicine, regenerative medicine, stem cell therapy, and different modalities related to regenerative medicine in AI. In fact, the data, and I don't have that chart handy in front of me right now, but with stem cell therapy, there are probably 4 or 5 times more interest on Perplexity and Claude than there are on Google search. And so the audience, and even though the volume is lower, it just seems like, relatively speaking to the size of the searches that are happening, there's a lot of people searching for this stuff on AI and querying AI to learn more about what stem cell therapy is. Now, when you put what's called AI schema onto your website, it basically allows these new AI search engines like Google's generative search and Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT to better understand it. Also, because a lot of these AI tools are now using voice search, right? A lot of these AI, by putting the AI schema markup on it, it actually allows your site to be read back in voice search through a lot of these AI tools. And so those are kind of the back end things that are not quite as sexy when it comes to marketing. The big thing that I also see that people miss is that they set up their Google business profile when they were like a functional medicine clinic, right? They were DPC, and maybe they've recently made the shift into longevity medicine or regenerative medicine, but their Google business profile doesn't reflect that. If you don't update your Google business profile, your description, the photos, the posts that go in your Google business profile, and show social proof that you are actually someone who provides stem cell therapy, you're going to miss out on a lot of what we call qualified bottom of the funnel searches for people who are ready for these treatments, right? So if you've started providing these stem cell therapy, but you haven't updated your Google business profile, that is a very easy way to get found organically, right? So these are just 3 not so content focused items that can help you get found on search from an organic standpoint, since you can't advertise on Google. Okay. Last is I just wanted to kind of go over really quickly, like how we at Tobe teach providers to do marketing. And we kind of have this pyramid and we call it the grow smarter method. And the idea here is that you want to establish your foundation by building what we call your online front door, right? And so that's great branding, right? Having a website that visually looks and feels premium, right? That's trustworthy. Having messaging that is very clear about what you do and what makes you different. And that all gets translated into a website, right? And having a website that follows the structure and the content that Chuck and I talked about a little bit earlier. Also, you need to have a CRM. And I'm going to talk about email marketing in a second, because if you are a provider that has built up a pretty good patient database over the years, and you've just started to offer stem cell therapy, email marketing is probably one of the best ways to get awareness of that service in front of your existing patients. After you've built this online front door, now it's all about getting found by local customers. Now, typically I would recommend search ads, but in this case with stem cell therapy, we can't do search ads because of the things that we talked about, but we can do what's called local SEO. And that's where when you create the content that we were talking about with Chuck, but also optimizing your Google business profile, you'll get found in search. Then the last step is after you get found by these high intent visitors, you want to start expanding your reach through organic content marketing, right? And that's creating more blog content, creating more videos, creating more social media posts. I've crossed out paid social media ads here and the reason for that is because just like with Google, Meta and Instagram are treating stem cell therapy as kind of like a restricted category. So you can try to run social ads. And in fact, what we talked about with Chuck, the use case that Chuck brought up was maybe have an informational webinar about how stem cells work, not a free consultation, right, as the ad. That could potentially work. But in general, advertising stem cell therapy is not going to work with paid social ads just like it does with search ads, right? So the reason why I wanted to kind of present our sort of approach to this is because these are sort of the four channels that I would sort of recommend when it comes to marketing stem cells. So the first is organic SEO, right? That's all about creating content on your website, optimizing your Google business profile. And the pros here is that you get a very wide reach with it. It helps you build authority and it captures what we call those really high intent searchers, right? The downside to this is that depending on the market that you're in, it could be slow if there's a lot of competitors who are competing for it. Now, again, I think there's a very wide open space right now because there's not a lot of competition here. But in some markets, there may be more competition. And also, you're going to have to invest in some website content. You're going to have to invest in getting your schema set up correctly. So there is some upfront investment before you see an ROI on the SEO. Just because you put up a blog post about it right away or you put up that service page, it doesn't necessarily mean that Google's going to find you right away. I usually give it about 30 or so days for you to get indexed by Google and to get found appropriately by Google before you start seeing some traffic or even phone calls that come in. The second is email marketing. So if you've got an existing email list, and I think a lot of providers do not do a good job of nurturing their email list, but your email list is probably your highest ROI channel that you can go to because you've already acquired these email addresses. They're a captive audience. They know who you are, and it's one of the fastest ways to get to revenue. These people know who you are, so they can trust you. And it's compliant in the sense that you're not going to be running ads. You're not going to be running afoul of any of those sort of like the issues that we run to with ads. I will say, though, that if you make statements that we talked about that are not compliant, you are still going to get in trouble for doing email marketing, even though you own that list, right? The obvious downside to email marketing is that you can only market to as many emails as you have. So if you're a relatively new provider and you've only got not that many email addresses, you're gonna have to build that email list before you can rely on this as a reliable channel. An example is I work with a provider who is offering stem cell therapy. And she had a list of about 4,000 patients that she's worked with over the years. So the first place we went when she started doing stem cell therapy was just to announce it, to let them know that, hey, we're offering this now as a service. And sure enough, she got a bunch of inbound consultation requests from that email list, right? Just like with search engines and Google content, you can put organic social media content on Instagram and Facebook, right? Now, this is almost sometimes a better way to be able to advertise because you can create video, right? You can get found on video through organic SEO if you're on YouTube, but it's a big commitment to create a YouTube channel. Most providers, they've got an Instagram page. They've got some kind of page that they're working with already, a Facebook page. And so it's very easy for them to create content, to spark that curiosity, generate awareness, but also because you're doing it on video, it's more authentic. It actually helps humanize you as a provider and a brand. The downside to this, just like with email, is that you have relatively limited reach. It's only based on the number of followers you have. And there's the potential for low conversion because a lot of times when people are on social, they're not looking for stem cell therapy, but you just put it in front of them for awareness, right? So social can be a very good channel if you've got a decent following, but if it can be relatively limited in reach if you don't have a good following or a lot of engagement on your existing account. It's very hard to build awareness organically, but you need to have a good base of content to start with. So if you're going to do organic social, make sure you make a big commitment to it and make sure you've got a good sort of bank of content to work off of. The last thing is offline marketing. Direct mail, even here in Utah, I've seen a lot of direct mail campaigns go out about stem cell therapy, peptide therapy, and a few other types of modalities that might be a little bit more difficult to advertise online. Print ads, right? I've seen those as well. Local radio and TV. It's really interesting when testosterone TRT became a pretty big thing, 5 to 8 years ago. The only place you saw people advertising it on was like ESPN talk radio, like morning talk radio, right? And then slowly, you're starting to see a little bit more like digital stuff, but still predominantly you see a lot of these kind of modalities being advertised on local radio and TV. And even though they tend to be a little bit more expensive, it can actually be a decent channel depending on your market and depending on where people's eyes and ears are. One thing I will say is referral partnerships are critical, right? And if you're a provider, when you first got started, I think a lot of providers got their first kind of like customers through a lot of referral partnerships. If you're like if you are an NP, like who might be working with like a gym, for example, right? Doing information sessions on stem cell therapy, right? That can be a great way for lead generation for yourself. So partnering with local businesses that might have your captive audience that you can get in front of is a great way to get off the ground, especially if you don't have an email list or a large following or organic social. So of all the different kind of marketing channels that you could use, these are kind of the ones that I see used most often when it comes to marketing stem cells or any kind of modality that might be a little bit more difficult to do via traditional ads. So if you have any questions about, how to do this or the channels or the messaging, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you out with that. So. Okay, well, that takes us just to the end. So just a few things to wrap up, right? One is you will not be banned from Google for an educational SEO page, right? Remember, the idea of being banned from Google is the idea of being taken off the advertising platform, right? Google's job is to index the internet. So regardless if you put compliant language out there or non-compliant language, and we recommend you don't put non-compliant language out there, Google will find a way to find your page and get it indexed, right? So remember, paid ads are restricted. It's not the same as organic SEO. Right. And as Chuck said, remember, market the entire idea of signaling, right? Not the idea of rebuilding, right? They're not construction workers, right? They're not rebuilding anything. And if you don't have good channels, whether they're if you are looking for other channels, excuse me, other than organic SEO, if you have a good email list or a good social media following, those can also be great ways to use some of the language and the content that Chuck and I talked about today. So that just about wraps up our conversation. If there's any questions, please pop them into the chat if anybody has them. I will say that I've got a couple of resources for you here. From Tobe, we have a free local SEO playbook that has been built specifically for healthcare practices. It literally gives you our step-by-step SOP on what we do to set up our clients' SEO, right? It is a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. It's every single step in there. But if you're more of a DIY kind of provider and you're do your own marketing, this is an outstanding resource for you, and it can help you execute a lot of the things that Chuck and I talked about today. Chuck, if they are interested in signing up with you and getting working with Hyagen Medical, where can they reach out to you?
It's easiest to reach us at our website, hyagenmedical.com, HYAGEN medical.com. Down at the bottom of that landing page, there's a request for information. Put in your contact information and we'll reach out to you within a day or so.
Right on. Cool. Well, I think that just wraps up our conversation. So, Chuck, thank you so much for spending your evening with me and nerding it out about legal stuff and marketing stuff. I'm sure we could talk about this all day. Maybe our
Always
audience
happy.
couldn't take it. But yeah, thank you so much for the knowledge bombs that you provide, and for being so clear and so practical. I know lawyers have a tendency to just to lawyer everything, but I think my value in working with you and seeing what you do is that you toe that right practical line between compliance and being able to convey the value of everything that you guys do. So thank you for that, Chuck.
Well, thank you for your time. I've enjoyed being a guest on your show.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to talking to you. Any questions, please feel free to reach out to Chuck and myself. Have a great evening. Take care, everyone.